Hello, I'm Dr Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Dr Jodi Richardson, and I've got a guest today where our conversation I think is going to be really one that you'll want to come back to revisit, and depending on where you're at in terms of with your own mental health, where you're at in terms of maybe a family member's mental health, I really know today's episode is going to support you because we're talking about therapy, we're talking about accessibility, we're talking about the things that you can do to really support yourself if you're having trouble accessing therapy in general, or you're with someone who doesn't feel quite like the right fit. And so we'll unpack all of these topics and so much more as we get into the conversation. And while I was preparing for this episode, I was really reflecting on my own journey with therapy. And I remember a therapist once saying that, isn't it a shame that people only sort of turn to therapy when they're really struggling, because therapy can really be so powerful in our lives, no matter what journey we're on, no matter what we're walking with or what we're struggling with, or if we're not struggling with something, because life has lots of ups and downs. But for so many, therapy is something that's really needed because of the mental health kind of fallout from the pandemic, and of course just the general challenges of living today with a lot of stresses, different stresses for different people. But as I was reflecting for myself, I realised it's probably around 25 years ago that I first accessed therapy, and I was so lucky. I was so lucky because we were spoilt for choice, I suppose. There was no challenge getting in to see a therapist. It was really just more of a focus on finding the right one. The right one for me was third time lucky. I was unlucky the first time in that it just wasn't the right fit. The approach the therapist took wasn't the right fit for me. And the second time was the same. And so I was able to get another referral and find Alec, who really was quite a lifesaver for me, really helped me out of the depths of depression, and way beyond that to really help sort of me with my mental health, and to not only be sort of struggling less with the symptoms of anxiety and depression, but also to sort of go beyond that kind of neutral symptom-free state into really creating and living a life that had more joy and more meaning and more purpose. And I guess that's, we've got him to thank for me being here today. But things are different now, and a lot of people are trying to access therapy, and that's a great thing. A lot of people have really understand that it's a very, very powerful treatment that can really support us with our mental health. But finding someone or the right person to guide you on your mental health journey through tough times of any kind is actually proving really hard for a lot of people, especially trying to access psychologists and psychiatrists. So I really encourage you to please keep trying if you're searching for the right person to support you or a family member. In the meantime, today's episode will really support you to understand more about what you can do to support yourself, and also connect you with a really magnificent counsellor who has written an incredible book called Paperback Therapy, who'll talk about counselling as a way to support you through the challenges that you are experiencing, if that's not something you've considered or it's something you'd like to learn more about. So joining me today is Tammi Miller. Tammi is the founder of Bare Therapy, BARE Therapy. She is a certified practicing counsellor. She's based in Sydney, here in Australia, and she is the author, as I mentioned, of Paperback Therapy. Tammi, thank you so much for joining us here today and having a chat about counselling and about your incredible book here on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jodi. What a wonderful introduction.
Oh, look, I feel like every time I do an episode, I really do genuinely love having the chance to talk to people like you, Tammi, and to be able to bring the wonderful work that you're doing to, the people of the podcast community and as people share the podcast with others, because there is so much we can do for ourselves, and a resource like your book is something that can be incredibly supportive to step people through so much of what they might do in the room with a counsellor like yourself or online. But yeah, I feel like, I'm always so excited. But that's just kind of me in life in general. So, so thank you again for sharing some of your very precious time with us. I guess perhaps the first question I'll open with, which is not what we talked about before we jumped on air, but can you talk to us about counselling, please? Because perhaps listeners might not necessarily have really thought about, okay, there are various professionals that we can access for help. There are psychiatrists who are medical professionals who are able to prescribe medication. There are psychologists who are unable to prescribe medication but support people with their mental health, as well as counsellors like yourself. So perhaps if you could share with us more about counselling and maybe a little bit about where the costs might compare to psychological treatments and the support, the financial support that's available here for psychology appointments, and how that compares with what's available through counselling, and then how the prices differ and the like.
Absolutely. It is incredibly difficult and confusing if you're first thinking, I need to see a therapist, and then not knowing who it is or what type of therapist to see. And the difficult thing there is that a counsellor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, those all fall under the term psychotherapist or therapist. So, they're quite interchangeable, but they are quite different in terms of offerings, but also the level of training that each of those individuals do. So I think counselling is what I do. I chose that one over psychology, and I actually started studying as a psychologist and then switched to counselling, mainly because I loved the person-centred approach of counselling. So psychology is a little bit more scientific, and they definitely have the ability, psychologists, to diagnose and assess more of those severe mental health problems. But when we are looking for more of a everyday maintenance type therapy, or maybe first time therapist, where you're just feeling a bit down and you're experiencing symptoms of anxiety or other mental health conditions, a counsellor can really support in those instances, because they essentially encourage clients to find ways to manage your own emotions in the context of their own life and their own setting. In terms of fee, it's a really interesting one that you bring up, and it's probably where the biggest differentiator is, because psychologists are able to be rebated by Medicare. So you can go to your GP as a client and say that you want a mental health care plan. The GP can give you a referral to a psychologist, and you can then get part of your payment to that psychologist paid for by Medicare. Usually that's 10 sessions. It was about 20 sessions during the pandemic, but they've reverted back to 10. And you have those throughout the year to use, which is really great if you're looking to get in and to have some of those funds rebated. Therapy is really expensive. It's one of the reasons I wrote the book. I couldn't believe, how expensive therapy was in those moments when we really need to see someone. And so counsellors, on the other hand, are able to charge you a fee that they choose. The average rate is, anywhere between $100 and $150 per session. And when you actually look at what you pay out of pocket for a psychologist, that is quite equitable. So when you're having trouble finding a psychologist, because it is still quite difficult, there are really long wait lists at the moment, one, to see your GP to get the mental health plan, but then actually to get into a psychologist, a counsellor can be a really great alternative for a therapist.
I really appreciate that we get a chance to talk about the cost, because it is so prohibitive for families, for so many people, not for everyone. And the scheduled fee that a psychologist can charge for an appointment between 46 and 60 minutes long is $300. Now, what you were saying, here in Australia, we can go to our GP and get a referral and get a mental health care plan, which can give us 10 appointments that have a portion of the psychologist's fee paid for by Medicare. And as you were saying, which I really appreciate, is it brings the cost of the psychology appointment down to what you could be paying for a counsellor. And so it's really important to know that you can see a counsellor, and whilst no, there isn't a Medicare rebate. The costs are not as high, and you might find you're paying a similar cost out of pocket to a counsellor as you would a psychologist, or possibly less. And it is up to the discretion of the practicing professional. But it's important to know that counselling professionals can be an incredible support. And Tammi, you've got a lot of people that you're working with, and you've got a little bit of room available in your week for some new clients. But you're making an important difference in people's lives and helping people get through. So tell us a bit more about what people could expect in a counselling session with you before we start to talk about some of the other things that can kind of get in the way of people reaching out for help.
A counselling session is 50 minutes with me. We always joke that, the first question we're always asked is why 50 minutes and not 60 minutes? And it's, those 10 minutes are to wrap up notes, to write up client notes, to make sure that if we go over, there's a gap for the next person. But also, counsellors need to go to the bathroom. They need to get a cup of tea. And so making sure that
You're
we
human?
have that. We are just like you. So making sure that we have that time to do those other bits too.
Yeah.
In a session, it is completely person-led and client-led. So what that means is the very first question that I usually ask someone is where they want to start today, and is there something that they wanted to talk to? Is there something that they wanted to talk about that has happened over the past week or since we last spoke? And sometimes the best sessions with the most breakthroughs actually happen when they come and say, "Oh, there's actually nothing, but I was scheduled in, so I still came to our appointment," because that is when we really can go back to things that were mentioned previously, or we can just have a casual chat, and then I can hear something that, brings up a different state of talking, or the person might choke on a word that they're saying, or I can see that they're fiddling while they're talking about something. And that is then when we'll dive into that piece further. So client-led, absolutely. But the beauty of a counsellor or a psychologist is that we can, see trends and patterns and be able to pull those together for the client when they may not be able to see them themselves.
It's really lovely that you have that person-centred approach whereby what might have been a big issue one week might not be the following, and it's not where the person wants to start sharing and opening up. But like you say, you pick up the threads, you start to see the patterns, and you can start to get a bigger picture of kind of what's underneath kind of the experience of the person. So I think it helps for people to get a bit of a peek behind the curtain, because it's pretty confronting for some people to go and see a therapist of any kind. It can be something that really holds people back. And what would you like people to know who are feeling like, gosh, I could really benefit from some therapy, from some support by a professional, but are feeling like really anxious about kind of making that call or scheduling an appointment?
It's quite ironic, isn't it, that one of the things that's really going to help us the most when we're feeling anxious can be such an anxiety-ridden task, which is to find a therapist and to reach out and say, hey, I need some support. And this is why I wrote Paperback Therapy, really, is because there's people there who, might not have any experience with therapy, or their cultural background might not allow them to even consider therapy, but be therapy curious. And so that's what the book really dives into, what it is that therapy is. And then importantly, there's a chapter on seeking professional help and how to actually write an email to see if the therapist has the right values for you. And that is, you mentioned it at the top of the show, that you had to see 3 therapists before you found the right one for you. And that is probably my key takeaway. That's probably my key takeaway. Not to give up after the first therapist just doesn't gel with your personality, or isn't doing the right, doesn't have the right approach to what you're after. You need to sift through, like anything, some different people before you find the right one that will fit. And when they fit, my gosh, they can make such a difference.
It's so powerful. It is, and it can be off-putting and exasperating, and another layer of challenge on top of a challenging time of life where you're reaching out for help. But I really appreciate the fact that you've emphasize that, because had I given up, I never would have found the right person. And unfortunately, in the climate that we're in, it can take a little bit longer, but understand the importance of that relationship. And so you're not going to insult somebody, because it's got to be the right fit, and the professional understands that. And so no doubt the book, I really want to dive into the book, but I do want to ask you about one other thing. Is stigma still something that stands in the way for people? And what would you like people to know about that? Because I know culturally it is a really difficult thing for some young people to do in certain cultures, is to reach out and to acknowledge that they need help, and to have those conversations with their parents, as well as taking those steps to find the right person with support from the family. Where do you see that play out in your work?
Stigma is really interesting, because I definitely believe, especially post-pandemic and during the pandemic, that we're much better at talking about our mental health and how difficult it can be to just be human in this world, especially with everything going on. But the stigma that still exists is that next step of, and I seek support from a therapist. And we can talk about our mental health, but until we start doing something about it and really talking about therapy itself and how beneficial it can be to those that can access it, that's when we're really going to see that true change happen.
If you're listening and you feel as though it's really shameful to reach out for help, or that in the culture in which you were raised, it's just not the done thing, then consider starting with a book like Paperback Therapy, and look at the ways that you can use the book to guide you through supporting yourself, and also over time, hopefully building the confidence to be able to reach out and be a bit curious about it, and dip your toe in the water and maybe book a session, see the experience for yourself, and then maybe decide from there. But it's certainly something that's changing, and a lot more people, as you say, are reaching out and really open about it and talking about how incredible it is and the difference it makes. So conversations like this are really powerful.
I think the cultural side of it is really important to touch on, because we know that generationally, older generations, particularly in culturally and linguistically diverse communities, therapy is not a done thing. You sort of just get on with it. But I have now some friends actually who are from those backgrounds and see a therapist, but don't tell their parents about it, because, they are a bit more switched on to the benefits of seeing a therapist and doing it in secret, which doesn't help the stigma, but does help them. And that is still breaking through and still really positive. And there's also a lot of groups and phone lines, for instance, available specific to different groups, such as Indigenous peoples, or culturally and linguistically diverse, or LGBTQI communities, who can support and know the background and the stigma that is layered on top of just general therapy stigma, and really help that first step to seeing a therapist.
It's a wonderful time in which we live, isn't it? With the changes in the way that we look at mental health and the supports that are available, and it's being connected. It's having the awareness that something is available, and then reaching out and having that experience of reaching out and being supported through even a phone service. It can oh goodness, the change in how you not only feel, but the sense of empowerment that comes from feeling supported in what you're going through, often normalized, and an opportunity to really speak to somebody who understands, cares, and can guide you, and to know that they're there to come back to is something I've experienced on a number of occasions, and I've spoken about here on the podcast before, Tammi. When my kids were little, I felt like I had the hotline to parent line because I just felt I was really struggling with my mental health, with postnatal depression and anxiety, and to be able to reach out, even though they're not solving all your problems. One phone call does not fix everything, but there's something about just knowing there's somebody there to call on. And so if that's the approach that you're going to take as a listener to start this journey to seeking help, then yeah, we really encourage that too. But Tammi, you've written a book that is almost like this bridge. I think about it as this bridge between where people are now and perhaps perhaps arriving at therapy or not necessarily needing to. And so can you tell us more about kind of what really prompted you to write a book? Because writing a book is a huge undertaking. If you could please tell us where the idea kind of germinated, how it all sort of began, and what listeners can hope for and expect when they are picking up a copy of Paperback Therapy.
This book is the book that I needed when I was going through some mental health lows, as I call them. Yeah. It's a resource that contains 25 tools, exercises throughout that I use with my clients to better their mental health or to just self-regulate or to recognize, I guess, how far they've come. And then also advice as to where we are and why we are feeling how we are. So, for instance, why we're feeling quite bad or why we might have anxiety or be experiencing burnout. The real prompt for it, though, was post-pandemic. I was just getting so many requests from friends and from clients to send me therapy exercises because I'm really struggling with my mental health, or just explain to me, why am I feeling really anxious right now? There's nothing actually impacting me. You know, I'm at home, I'm making bread, everything's fine, and yet I have this constant state of anxiety. And so I was doing that and sending them off, and it was, it was quite onerous. Happy to help, but I really just was recognizing this through thread of something needs to exist when we can't get to a therapist, when we can't, and I think prioritizing is the key word here. So, they couldn't prioritize the time or they couldn't prioritize the funds yet to go and see a therapist. So I then just decided, look, I'm going to pull it together into a proposal, and I'm very lucky that Simon & Schuster picked it up. And Paperback Therapy was born pretty quickly after that. And hit shelves in March 2024 and has received pretty great feedback in terms of the book itself being used how I wanted it to be used. By that, I mean, when I see people in bookstores or I've seen it in public where the book is itself quite tattered and there's post-it notes all throughout, and it's the paper is turned back on the pages because it's being used. And that is really quite key. It's not the kind of book that you pick up and read all at once. That would be quite heavy, actually. It's more of a workbook. And if you pick it up and you're feeling anxious, do the chapter on anxiety, do the exercises that are in there to help you try and regulate your breathing, and then put it aside. And then you might want to pick it up later on and try the chapter on burnout if that is something that's impacting you.
What an absolute joy to see a copy of your book in someone's hands, let alone see that it has been very well read, well loved, and that somebody's taken time to really highlight the sections that they want to come back to. And can you talk to us about, you've got 25 of these tools. So perhaps let's start by talking about sort of the categories of tools that you've included, if that's a reasonable way to ask the question, the types of tools that you've included. And people might be thinking, gosh, 25 tools. Oh, that sounds onerous. I know that's not the way the book is written and intended. So maybe talk to us about the types of tools you've got and how people can go about using the book to find the tools that are the right fit for them.
Yeah, it's a really good point because the last thing that you want to do is more homework, particularly when you're feeling a bit stressed or, a bit anxious. You don't want to have to do the work sometimes. You just want a quick fix. And you also don't need to be more overwhelmed, and 25 tools absolutely would do that. But the way that the exercises are included in the book is actually in each of the relevant chapters. So there's some tools in there that are about regulating your breathing, and those ones are more in the chapters around anxiety. But then there's more around identifying your values or creating a bit of a safe space, and those are in the chapter around building self-esteem and self-worth. Or there's tiny tools that are quite important that we don't really think about, such as setting goals and reflecting on where you're at the moment. And those are more in the upfront so that you have a bit of a way forward with the rest of the book. So there would be readers out there, absolutely, who don't use all of the tools might literally only use one tool because they love it and it resonates with them. But there might be a situation 5 years down the track when they are experiencing another bit of pressure in their mental health and want to pick up the book and see if there's an exercise that suits, and it might be there waiting for them.
And that's the beauty of it. It's something that you'll come back to over and over again. And the chapters, the way that you've put it together with the different chapters is, I think, really helps people to kind of dive into where they need the most help to start off with. And burnout is just such a huge challenge. And I know you do work a lot with women and a lot with professional women who are struggling probably just with everything that, you know, life throws at us, because, yeah, there's it's a lot. But, yeah, tell us about burnout, please, and maybe one of the strategies that you've included, because I've had conversations with experts where we've sort of dedicated a whole episode to burnout, and one of the questions one of the experts shared was this idea that, you know, we're on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being completely frazzled and burnt out, 0 being cool, calm, collected, not a problem. Where on that sort of continuum do you fit? And if you say 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, then that's a really good measure of exactly where you're at in terms of burnout. So if listeners are really identifying that, gosh, I'm on this road to burnout, or I feel like I'm there already, what's something that you've shared in the book that might listeners might be able to sort of take away from this conversation and put into practice?
Burnout was particularly prevalent during the pandemic, but also since then, as we've gotten used to this way of working, and particularly if you're working from home and you've lost that third space sort of disconnect between the office and your home life. And for that reason, boundaries are really quite interconnected with burnout, and making sure that you have them in place both physically and emotionally is really quite important. So the chapter on burnout is really reminding readers around what they have the right to, and breaking down those self-imposed, sometimes, expectations around how they should be in the world. And this is particularly important with people pleasers who just want to say yes, yes, yes to everything. And of course, that's usually women. So reminding them of their rights to say no, their rights to ask for help, and their rights to say, you know, I don't need to give you a reason for my no. It's just a hard no at this time. And then one of the exercises in that chapter is called safe space. And this is when we're particularly dysregulated in our emotions and want to come back into ourselves and, I guess, very slowly build back up those invisible fences of boundaries. And it's all about creating some really safe space that we can go to that is just ours. And if you're a parent or you're a busy working woman, this can be really difficult to find. You know, everything is always husband first, parent first, partner first, child first, never, you know, what's just for me. So creating a really safe space, and this exercise sort of talks through the motions of how to set up a safe space with all of the senses taken care of, you know, something that is soft to the touch, some happy podcasts or a great playlist that you can hear, some candles or fresh flowers or some cooking smells, positive smells, tastes such as tea or chewing gum or mints, just those things that you can turn to reframe in your mind that it's time to just take a moment and remember that you're safe and that you can get through this busy period by reestablishing those boundaries.
And the opportunity to move ourselves into a space that is our own, over time, our nervous system becomes trained, doesn't it? That when we move into that space, it's just like, this is where I feel safe. This is where I can come home to myself. I can just take a breath, take a moment, and the nervous system gets some reprieve in that space, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think scent in particular is one of those things to have in that space that speeds up that process. So before bed, for instance, it's a really good opportunity to use a lavender scent, for instance, to calm you down and switch your brain into thinking this is time for bed, this is time to sleep. And to the same token, when you go to your safe space, if you have an aromatherapy roll on or a candle that you burn each time that smells the same, it can remind your brain, okay, I'm safe, I am calm. Take some deep breaths and then take the next steps forward.
Scent is something that is incredibly powerful, and it's a way for us, because we can't settle ourselves by thinking our way out of a jam. We have to use our body, and by using a hand cream, which listeners will have heard me talk about before, but or like you say, an essential oil or a roll-on, or and I remember back, Tammi, when I first started seeing my psychotherapist back in, goodness, the late 90s. He taught me to meditate, and I had a word. I think it was transcendental meditation, and I had a word that he assigned to me or suggested I use, and it was really just about focusing in on my breath. And as I would breathe out, in my mind, I would sort of say this word silently to myself. It's just a one-syllable word, and what I found over time, after training my nervous system with meditation, was that I found myself in a difficult situation where I felt like I was becoming anxious. I could take one inhalation, and as I breathed out, I could say that word silently to myself, and it was like my own nervous system reset in that moment. And we can do that with scent. We can do that with, like you were saying, our surroundings. We just need to find our thing, don't we?
And it's just practice, really, as well. The more that you do that, the easier that will come.
One thing you said before about no being, well, what came to mind for me was no being a full sentence, no being just, we don't need to justify ourselves. I've spent a lot of time over the years. I don't any longer, but I used to want to share all the reasons why I really can't do this thing I'm saying no to, because I've pretty much always said yes, and it's no longer the case. And I want to share this because if anyone's listening is feeling like people pleasing is a huge part of life for you, and that it's really taking its toll, because it does, then I just want to share this with you. I have challenged myself to not give a reason when I'm declining something. And I was recently invited to do something, and I immediately knew that it was a no thank you. And so I just simply said, thank you so much for thinking of me. I really appreciate the invitation, but it's a no thank you. And it feels a bit uncomfortable at first, because the instinct is to then say, because of all these reasons. And I thought, you know what? My reasons are enough. I've been asked an invitation. I'm declining it politely with great manners. That is all I need to do. And the more we do it, the easier it gets. And Adam Grant posted, and I saw it on Instagram just today, and I've just jumped in, Tammi, just to have a quick look, and I can't find it. But he said that exactly to this point, that no is a complete sentence. We do not need to justify our reasons for declining something. And he shared a small note where he had asked somebody for something, and the person wrote back and said, no thank you, for secret reasons. And I loved that, because it was quite intriguing, but also a very clear reply, and also, you know, just no extra information given. We don't have to say for secret reasons. We have our reasons, and our reasons are enough for us, and we make the decisions. So I like that we've had the chance to talk about boundaries, because often with our mental health, even just adjusting our boundaries or holding more firmly to them can make quite a difference, can't it?
Absolutely. And I think all of these things are so interconnected. We talked a little bit earlier around self-esteem and self-worth, and that is where this comes into play, especially for, you know, busy people like yourself. If you're being asked to do things that maybe isn't a good fit right now, when we say no and that's the end of it, that's our complete sentence, what we're doing is protecting our time and recognizing that our time is worth something. And it's the same when we ask for, you know, to be paid and remunerated correctly, or we're asking for those things that we deserve. Ultimately, what that's doing is building our self-worth, saying, yes, I am worthy of being paid correctly, or I am worthy of them recognizing that my time is important to me. And as such, that then builds that self-esteem for you. And it all just has such a positive snowball effect in the long run.
It really does. And I think for those of us who are parents, we can help to develop these beliefs in our children and help them to recognize that they are making meaningful contributions. And of course, at the start, they make meaningful contributions in the home. But self-esteem has been something that has used to be really the focus of kind of like, let's build self-esteem to build and protect our mental health. But there's been a bit of a departure from that in many ways. Can you tell us more about why self-esteem is important and why it's a part of what we can do to really look after ourselves, but it's not everything as it once was believed to be?
I think self-esteem perhaps has a little bit of a dirty connotation by being interspersed with being cocky or overconfident, and it's not the same thing. Self-esteem is essentially being able to hold your head up high and knowing your worth. And that's different to holding your head up high and being entitled. It's a very different thing. So if our self-esteem is good, we can deal with things outside of our control in a much better and easier way. If we recognize our values and live to those values and then have positive self-esteem as a result, if something external happens or we get bad feedback or we have something said about us, or in the instance of kids, there's a bully, their self-esteem is sort of acts as Teflon and kind of just enables that to just roll over us, and we say, oh, I don't care what you think because I know that I am a good person, or I know that I did the right thing. And that's where self-esteem comes into it.
Tammi, thank you for helping us look at that from a different perspective, and that our self-worth is incredibly important. Not everybody has had that fostered in them through their parenting and their upbringing, and our genetics and our upbringing can have a really big influence on our mental health and the way that we cope with challenges. What is it that you've written about that, or you could share with us now, perhaps, that listeners could do to help to strengthen their self-worth if they know that that's kind of an area that they could really benefit from?
I was that person too. I was the one who had incredibly low self-esteem. And it took me a lot of work in the therapy room and just generally to build myself up to literally believing that I was worthy. And it's only been the last 5 to 10 years that that's been a true belief of mine. And before that, it's hard. It is hard to live in this world and take the external pressures when you don't have that protective armor that is a level of self-esteem. And it doesn't have to be super, super high. You just have to recognize that you deserve good things. In the book, we have a few exercises and things to talk about when it comes to self-esteem, but really it comes down to knowing what matters to you and then eliminating the rest. And that is values-based work, really. Yeah. It's recognizing that you feel it's important to be loyal, that you feel that family is important, that you feel that doing the right thing is important. And if anything external challenges that, you can sit positively in your self-esteem because you are living to your values. So those things are quite interconnected. And building self-worth, it's a little bit phooey, but writing on a poster and putting it somewhere you can see, I am worthy of love, or I am worthy of recognition, or whatever it is that you feel is missing, that you need a reminder of. And just reading it every now and then, even better if you say it to yourself, that does really help, just to remind us in the day-to-day grind that we are worthy of good things.
The reminders really are important because we are bombarded, aren't we, Tammi, with information, and we can spend a little bit of time online. And I really limit myself. I use an app called Opal that blocks my social media accounts, because I can tend to just, have a little few minutes on my hands and want to dive on and have a little look like the rest of us, because it's addictive. And we are bombarded with a lot of information. And to be able to take some time to, literally a minute, to write a note. You don't have to do it in fancy writing. It doesn't have to be on special paper. It just needs to be somewhere where you'll see it, that will remind you, because in all the noise of every day, it's easy to get sort of swept up in what everyone else is doing. And it's time that we turn the spotlight of attention back onto ourselves, isn't it? To take some time to think about, what do I need right now? And if one of those things is a small reminder of what's important, one of the things you're focusing on when you're looking at amplifying your own mental health and well-being, taking a moment to write a little note that's a reminder daily can be really powerful. We don't have to make enormous changes to experience the benefits, do we?
No, and this is what I really hope people take away from Paperback Therapy, is this one little thing that I can do for me, and it might change everything for you at one moment, or it might change everything in that moment. And it's interesting you mentioned social media, because we haven't really touched on it, and yet it is so impactful to our self-esteem because of this comparison that we do with everything that we see online. And I talk in the book a little bit around setting social media boundaries and making sure to do that in a way that's, I guess, actually possible, because I think a lot of people say, just get off social media for the weekend, or get off social media and you'll be great. But that's not how we live our lives. It's just not realistic for me to say to somebody, get off social media, when they are a Gen Z or they have a business that needs them to be on Instagram. So it's more about curating your feed and really asking yourself, am I following this person because they add value and they make me feel better about myself, or at least neutral? Or am I following them because I think maybe they're going to make me inspired to work out, but actually every time I see them at the gym, it just makes me feel bad that I'm not there. Yes. And really asking those questions and just muting those ones that maybe you don't need to follow because they have a bad impact on your self-esteem.
Couldn't agree more. It's very easy to unfollow and just to reflect, just to spend 10 minutes on Instagram and check in and say, how do I feel after that? Do I feel inspired? Do I feel uplifted? Do I feel excited? Do I feel creative? How do I feel? And if your answer to that question is always less than, it's time for a change. And one of the things I'm thinking about, Tammi, is because I'm really becoming more intentional when it comes to spending. I've recently read Good with Money, and I realised that I've been caught up in following some of the influencers I follow, fashion influencers I follow on Instagram. And I follow women who are really relatable. Like, they'll put together outfits that might be from Witchery or Country Road, or, Zara or Saba or Kmart or Target or Big W. And so you've got this mix and match of kind of really super cheap fashion and other items that might be more staples. And then sometimes they'll have very expensive shoes. And I realised that when I was thinking about my wardrobe, I just kept thinking I never had enough. Whereas I have plenty of clothes, and I've been, and this is what social media will do to us. We compare, and it keeps us wanting more, and that's the whole point of it. And so if we can take a moment, take a breath, think about what we want and what we need, what we've got, and what's going to add to our lives rather than take away, whether that's related to our mental health or our finances or whatever it is that's important to you. I think being intentional about who we follow and who we unfollow is something that we can do to take ownership in this kind of big kind of machine of social media and kind of these technology addictions that we have, because it's just the way that the apps are programmed and the way that everything's set up and designed to be very persuasive, to always keep us wanting more and to keep coming back. So I'm glad we got a chance to sort of touch on that, but we've run out of time. And so, Tammi, I thank you so much for joining me and having this chat today and sharing just a sort of a few little insights a few important insights, I should say, from the work that you're doing with your clients as a counsellor and your incredible book, Paperback Therapy, which can really support people to make practical changes in their own life and support themselves, but can also act as a bridge between where you might be now and finding a good fit psychologist or counsellor so that you can get extra help if you need it. So Tammi, how can people work with you and get in contact with you and purchase the book?
Thanks, Jodi. It was awesome to be on the podcast, and I think we just skipped on the surface. There's so much that we could talk about. So thank you also for the great work that you're doing in normalizing these conversations, particularly around anxiety.
Thank you.
I am on beartherapy.com.au, where you can find all the links to my social media channels and also to the book. The book is called Paperback Therapy. It's available now from all good bookstores and also online. Please do support your independent bookstores. We love them and they are really passionate about this book, which I love to hear. The book is available also as an audiobook, and you get the downloadable PDFs if you prefer that to a physical book, but it is the kind of resource that you need to print out or have with you so that you can be like those ones that I love where they are highlighted and dog-eared and post-it noted, because it means that we're all doing the work.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. I never thought I'd be encouraging people to dog-ear a book.
No, neither. It's made a lot of people unhappy, but it's what I like.
Yeah, that's it. And look, I've been doing that a little bit too. The books, I'm a prolific reader, and sometimes I just don't have my highlighter with me, and I'm just very old-fashioned in that I like to have the copy with me, but sometimes if I don't have my highlighter, I will turn the corner and I just think, oh, well, that's the way I need to roll today. I don't want to, usually I'm in bed. I don't want to get out of bed to go yeah. So, no, Tammi, thank you again. It's just been such a joy chatting with you, and I really am grateful to you for heeding the call, starting with your friends. So thanks to your friends for sort of reaching out to you and for you to kind of recognise, hey, it's not just my inner circle that can benefit from this. This is something that everybody could really benefit from, and they absolutely are. So thank you.
Thank you, Jodi.
Thanks, Tammi. And thank you for listening. And please, when you get your copy of Paperback Therapy and you are reading, if you do dog-ear it or you're highlighting it or you're using tabs, please take a photo and share it with Tammi on social media, and tag me too at Dr Jodi Richardson, because we love to hear how the work that that we're both doing here on the podcast, obviously today, but in the rest of our professional lives as well, is really impacting you. So let us know. We appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did recording it, and I can't wait to be back with you again next week. All right, take care of you. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.